I'd like to introduce our panelists. Bruce Fuller is an education professor at UC Berkeley and author of the book When Schools Work. Bill Essayli is a Republican assemblyman from Riverside County and author of Assembly Bill 1314, which was the inspiration behind local boards' parental notification policies. And Corey Jackson is a Democratic assemblyman from Moreno Valley who authored a successful bill to ban book bans in California schools. We also are going to be presenting video testimonials from two parents representing either side of the issue. This is a contentious issue, so we'd like to lay a few ground rules. No interrupting. Please keep your responses brief so we have time to cover all the material. And we'd like to keep this respectful and educational for everyone. And we'll have time for questions from the audience at the end of the discussion. If you have questions, please write them on the index card on your seat and raise your hand and someone will come and collect them during the session. And I'd like to start by asking a few questions of the audience. How many of you all have experienced any of these issues with your local school boards? Great. And how many of you feel like you have a good understanding of the role of school boards and what power exactly they have? That's very, very encouraging. We hope that some of these questions get answered today. Professor Fuller, I would like to start with you. Can you put this in context for us? Why are these issues cropping up now, and why school boards?
Thanks, Carolyn. Well, looking back in history, the culture wars are not really new in the arena of public education. If you look back in the late 1800s, the LA School Board enforced all instruction. It had to be held in Spanish to attract more kids into public schools, and eventually that was pushed out. If you look at German immigrants or Scandinavian immigrants in the upper Midwest, there were big cultural battles over the language of instruction. Some of you might remember the early days of charter schools when Gary Hart passed the first authorizing legislation. There were schools in my neck of the woods south of Berkeley that were pro-Islam and getting public funds, and school boards had to mediate that. So Carolyn, it's not really a new issue, but it's become more vociferous, I think.
Why do you think that is?
Well, two or three forces. I think one is the dominant cultural framework of American society is certainly evolving over time. We've seen earlier periods of immigration, we've seen early periods of religious contention, and that sort of social evolution continues. Certainly the dominant cultural framework is pushing back, and that's clearly seen in our local and national politics. And so the culture wars provide a stage within the school board arena to fight out that dominant cultural framework. I think the other thing which is more political is that as the far right and candidates on the far right have tried to establish more of a clear and crisp imagery and trying to gain more media attention, it's sharpened this cultural debate. And then you have people like the governor pushing back with equal sharpness. The Chino Valley incident, the Temecula incident, this provoked a really sharp reaction from the governor. And again, you have to ask, is this helping to educate voters, helping to educate parents, or is this really a bilateral political conversation?
Thank you. Assemblyman Essayli, tell us your reasoning behind Assembly Bill 1314. What does the bill say, and what inspired you to write it?
Thank you, and thank you for this forum to be able to have this dialogue, and I think it's a really important conversation. I'll just note that we're going to have more of a dialogue about this bill than was ever had in the legislature, because my bill wasn't even afforded a hearing. And I think that's a real problem in this legislature, where one party feels like they don't even need to have a discussion on issues. They get to just dominate and shut down opposition. And I think that's why you see this issue cropping up, is when you don't allow a forum for democracy and opposing viewpoints to be heard, it's going to pop up in other places, whether that's in local school boards or whether that's in the ballot initiative that's being put forward now. So I'll tell you why I introduced AB 1314, because when I was running, I was informed of multiple cases where parents were learning that school districts were involved in socially transitioning the gender of their children at school, changing their names, their pronouns, their locker rooms, and the parents were never informed. And in fact, it was hidden from the parents. They kept it secret. They would use one name in front of the parents, and then at school, they would use a different name with the child. And so I looked into this. I said, where did this come from? Why is this happening all of a sudden? And what we found out is that the Department of Education, the state, put out a guidance to the school districts and said, when a child expresses they want to change their gender, you are to keep that private from the parents. That's where that came from. There was no debate, there was no discussion, and so I wrote my bill to counter that. And all my bill did, it didn't say you can't transition, it didn't say anything like that. It just said is if the school is going to be officially involved in socially transitioning the child, which means the child has gone to the school and said, I would like to be recognized by a new name, or I want my records changed to this new gender, that is when it would trigger to let the parents also know that the child is experiencing gender dysphoria or going through this, and so the parents can be there to support their kids. It's not, it wasn't an attack or to go out. It just says if the school is involved on an official level, the parents need to know as well. That's what the bill says.
Thank you. The bill did, as you mentioned, stalled in the legislature after the Assembly Education Committee Chair, Al Maritucci, declined to schedule it for hearing. His exact words were, not only is this bill bad policy, but also scheduling a hearing would potentially provide a forum for increasingly hateful rhetoric targeting LGBTQ youth. What was your reaction to that, and tell us what happened next?
Well, my reaction was that it's false and that they didn't really want to have the discussion because I don't believe the Democrat Party wants to actually be on record saying that they're against parents being notified. And in fact, some legislators tried to do a bill to counter what was happening in the school districts, and the governor said, no, we're not doing this. So I think what they're trying to do is have it both ways, and they're trying to, they're moving forward with this agenda at the schools of keeping the parents in the dark, but they don't want to have any actual on-the-record policy votes and discussions on where they stand. This is a very universal popular opinion. 80% of Californians, according to Gallup, support parental notification and parental rights. So that's why I believe they're using this false narrative that it's an attack on LGBTQ people, which is not true. I would never do anything that would attack them. In fact, if you look at my record, I voted for some pro-trans bills, which allow parents to keep name changes sealed for minors in the court system. I voted to put gay legal marriage, to put gay marriage back on the ballot so the voters can change the Constitution. So this isn't about LGBT issues. This is about what's the appropriate role for parents in raising their kids. That's what this conversation is about.
Thank you. Assemblyman Jackson, tell us what inspired you to write AB 1078, the so-called book ban, and tell us what the bill does exactly.
Sure. I actually decided to introduce the bill before I was actually sworn in, before local districts within the Inland Empire even introduced it, began the process of doing book bans. And the reason why is way before the 2020, what year is this? 2022 election, we saw states already banning books. And I knew that it was only a matter of time before it hit California. And so I thought that at the end of the day, why not make sure that we're getting ahead of it so that we can make sure that we are protecting the narratives of some of the most vulnerable populations and historically marginalized and oppressed populations in the state.
Thank you. California schools, as we all know, run under this idea of local control, which means that school boards actually have quite a bit of autonomy. Why did you think that this should be a statewide issue? Why did you want to make this a statewide action?
Because I come from a population that understands how bad local control can be.
Yeah, tell me more.
Slavery was a local control issue. Abortion is a local control issue. And when you come from segregation, a local control issue. And so the question becomes this, and I think, I think I said some of these in my remarks on the floor when we started to revisit remarks from Martin Luther King and others that really had the debate to say this, that Not all laws are moral. As a matter of fact, there's been many laws that are on the books that have proven to be unjust. And it's important that we have justice as a part of our policymaking decisions as well. And so when I think about local control, I think about it differently. And one way to draw the line of local control, responsible local control, is okay, as long as people are protected and that is being administered in a just way. But as soon as you use local control to marginalize, oppress people, and to try to erase or block the historical history and narratives of people, then you'll lose your local control because you're not using it responsibly. And so for those who just say local control for local control's sake, I think are not real, needs to be better students of their history. And in many cases, it's not everyone's fault. I mean, my favorite subject was history. I'm probably in the minority when it comes to that. And so if you don't have a historical context in which you are looking at an issue, right, then you might come to a different conclusion. But when we talk about the arc of justice, the arc of history bending towards justice, certainly you have to think of local control in that context as well.
Thank you. This might be a good time to watch our videos. We have 2 parent videos we'd like to show. They will be appearing on the screen here momentarily.
Hi, my name is Erin Friday. I am a lifetime Democrat. I also voted for same-sex marriage, and I am a licensed attorney, and I am the mother of a daughter who used to believe that she was a boy. She came about this because her school in middle school told her that she could be born in the wrong body, and she and all of her friends, 100% of them, came out somewhere on the LGBTQ list right after that class. They picked pansexual, polyamorous, lesbian, and transgender. Half of her Girl Scout troop also came out as transgender later that year. So schools are foisting these identities that are false identities on our students, and they're doing this by reading, children's books like this, I Am Jazz, and telling kindergartners and TK kids that they could be born wrong, which is a horrible thing to say to any child, that they could have the wrong body and that everything is wrong with them and that they must medicalize or transition to be their authentic selves. And that is absolutely horrifying and cruel. The LGB is a different animal than the T and the Q. Right now in our public schools, they have this book in 5th grade. This book is gay. This book teaches students in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade how to find a lover online. It has instructions on what to do when they find a lover online. Our schools in California have a proficiency rate of 33% proficiency in math and I believe under 50% for English. So our schools are teaching about transgenderism and sexuality instead of teaching math and arithmetic. Tony Thurman, the superintendent of schools for California, went to Nystrom Elementary in Richmond, California, a school that is 90% Black and brown kids, and he donated a bunch of transgender books. This school has a 19% proficiency in math and science. Again, our public schools now are indoctrinating our kids instead of teaching them. My child thought she was a boy because schools told her that she could jump out of her sex. When I pulled her from the public school, she returned to believing that she was a girl. There are countless of parents like me who pulled their children out of public school when they took on a false transgender identity and their children returned back to being comfortable in their natal sex. So our public schools have just gone, in my mind, insane. And they need to stop indoctrinating our kids and go back to basics. Stop with the pronoun game. No one can change sex. It's not possible.
My name is Angie, and I'm a parent in Glendale Unified School District. Over the last several years, we've seen coordinated attempts to attack LGBTQ plus students, teachers, and inclusive programs in our public schools locally, and we know that it's played out across the state. These attacks have been vicious and persistent and have caused many of us to fear for the safety of our LGBTQ families, children, and our community. In my family and in our community as a whole, we hold close the values of acceptance and respect for all people. As a parent, it's been important for me to try to pass on those values to my child, and I've felt really fortunate to be in community with strong public schools in a state with laws and policies that protect and support these values by providing for inclusive curriculum and programs which support all gender identities and types of families. As we've experienced the hate and violence that has unfolded based on misinformation and lies about fundamental curriculum, as we've seen bigoted views of gender and sexuality being brought to the fore and used as ammunition against beloved teachers, leaders in our community, and many of our families and children. Some of us have been afraid that we would be more personally targeted, that our children would be at risk. Some of us have considered leaving the district, while others have felt too vulnerable to speak out. And we know that the state and local law are on the side of protecting the privacy and civil rights of LGBTQ plus kids and families. And we hope that our leaders will not back down to efforts that are meant to roll back these rights and protections. We know that LGBTQ plus kids are being targeted by groups who want to roll back civil rights, who want to exert ideological control over our public schools and public spaces. And we refuse to allow them to make our children, our families, or our communities political pawns. Despite the threats and lies that have been advanced against us and our schools, despite the bigotry and violence we've witnessed and experienced, we've actually found our community has started to come together and become stronger. These attacks have led us to seek out and connect with the real majority in our community, families and individuals who share our values of acceptance, inclusion, diversity, and respect. We can't afford to minimize the threat posed by anti-public school, anti-LGBTQ plus efforts, but we know they don't represent the vast majority of our schools and communities. And we're learning together how to keep each other safe, how to advocate for an even stronger and more active commitment to protecting our LGBTQ plus kids and community. We feel really strongly that leadership at every level, from local to state and local and national politics, should re-emphasize our shared commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our public schools and in our public spaces overall.
I sort of want to switch up the questions a little bit and go to you, Assemblyman Essayli. Based on what the parent from Glendale was saying, I mean, it is a fact that LGBTQ students are more likely to be bullied. They're more likely to suffer from mental health struggles. They're more likely to miss school. Don't these policies just make life harder for them?
What policies?
Parental notification policies.
So I disagree that parents are a threat to their children. Because what I heard her talk about people targeting and threatening LGBT kids, no one's going to love their kid more than their parent. Even if they don't agree with everything their kid does, they still love them and they're going to have their best interest for them. And if we want to talk about what's best for kids, there is peer-reviewed studies by the National Institute of Health that show that children experiencing gender dysphoria have better outcomes with the support of parents. So I think excluding parents from what's going on with their kids, allowing kids to live a double life at school under, with the full knowledge and consent of the district is more harmful to them than to let the parents know what's happening so the parents can find and get them support and assist them. We're talking about life-altering, huge decisions here. Changing your gender is not some small thing, it's a big deal. And I don't know that children have the capacity to make that decision at every age. I think if you're an adult, do whatever you want, a very libertarian view. Once you've turned 18, you do whatever you want. But children is very complicated issues. And if people are telling them that changing your gender is going to fix a mental health issue or deal with other issues, that's really dangerous stuff. And now we have students on the back end who are detransitioning, who went through this process, and they regret it. They regret having operations to medically change their bodies. They regret taking drugs that prevent them from going through puberty. These are life-altering decisions that we can't go back. They're irreversible. And some kids will be permanently sterilized. They'll never have children. So all I'm saying is that let's just pause. Let's see what's going on with the child and let the parent help them, guide them, and decide what's best with them. The real question we should be asking here is, what authority does the state and the school district have to withhold information from parents? They don't replace the parent at the school. That's not how this works. They have no right, no authority to withhold information from parents. In fact, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed parents have a constitutional right to raise their kids, not the school district.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm going to get back to that issue of what authority schools have in a minute, but I just wanted to pivot to you, Assemblymember Jackson. I mean, do you agree with what he said, that these policies are not harmful to LGBTQ students?
No, I don't agree with him. I agree with some of the things that he brought up in terms of the study, which is correct. When a parent is involved in a child's life, there's totally better outcomes. But the problem is that doesn't tell the whole story on what happens on the ground. And as a member of the LGBTQ caucus, who brings their own life experiences and real knowledge to what happens on the ground, is totally being ignored. There is a reason why one of the largest homeless populations are LGBTQ young people. And that's because they have been kicked out of their homes by their parents, because they have come out to them as being a member of the LGBTQ community, right? And so the question becomes, as a society, how do we balance the two? And there is clear harm that is done to people, long-term effects, whether it's trauma, whether it's issues of abuse and neglect, because a parent believes that they have to punish their child for being that way. And so I think the idea is that, and the opposition that we have to the forced outing, is that, yes, you actually are putting young people in danger. And that danger, yes, can come from their own household, right? And that's just a reality. And not taking that into account is a real big issue. Number two, I think what's important to understand is that this whole narrative that it is the mission of schools to turn children into members of the LGBTQ community and to change their genders is just completely false. And we know that because this is more of a political agenda than anything else. I think it was CalMatters that reported over a year ago that there was a memo sent out, right, saying that this is our political strategy to create another boogeyman so that people can get angry and be able to turn out to vote for Republicans. On the Republicans' website, party's website, it says sign up, be a part of our parent organizing crew to engage in culture wars, right? To be able to do this. This is a political strategy. And even if there's concerns, there's a process to go through with schools to be able to address those concerns, right? But to force every child to be outed, right, is clearly dangerous. And if you're not going to respect the lived experience of those who've actually lived through that kind of stuff, right, I think it's immoral.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to clarify, the state of California does have a law that students are entitled to privacy related to gender issues. They are not entitled to privacy over things like grades, attendance, discipline, certain health issues. Parents have a right to know those things, but it does say that students have a right to privacy related to gender issues.
No, not from their parents. The law does not say children have a right to privacy from parents. They have a right to privacy from third parties, but parents are their legal guardians. There is no law, there is no case that has ever said children have a right to privacy from parents. In fact, that would be unconstitutional. And that's my opinion. I think that's the opinion of at least one federal judge who's opined on the issue, and I think this will go up to the Supreme Court. But I disagree with that statement. I also disagree that there's any forced outing. I want to be very clear. The policy that I proposed, AB 1314, would only go into effect when a child requests the school district to identify them by a new gender. So it's the child who's coming to the school saying, I want to be recognized by a new name or gender. That's the only time it gets triggered. It's not people are out listening in the schoolyard and looking to out kids. That's a false narrative, and that's designed to fearmonger and to scare people. That has never been proposed, and I would never support anything like that.
Thank you. I wanted to pivot to you, Professor Fuller. Going back to this issue of schools' authority and local control versus, there's many, many layers of people who make decisions about schools. And clearly, we're increasingly seeing conflicts between local school boards and state agencies and state officials. Why do you think this is happening? And in a perfect world, what should that balance of power be? And what's best for students, really, is the underlying issue.
Yeah, well, I think the two women who spoke helped to clarify a boundary for me, which is the state can act to preserve tolerance and to protect weaker groups and individuals, as Mr. Jackson articulated, or the state can come out with its own agenda, and I think that's oftentimes a blurry line. I mean, if we think back to the civil rights movement, when the federal government enforced busing or desegregation, the state was trying to protect black kids in the South, but over time, the state came to be perceived as having its own agenda. And so I think we're sort of seeing that playing out in California as well. That's the first point. Should Sacramento be assertive in protecting all individuals and groups that have weak political power locally? And then when does the state actually advance its own agenda? There was a case in the Bay Area last week of the woke kindergarten curriculum, which the Chronicle reported on, where the school district is pushing a woke curriculum, an abolitionist curriculum in a heavily Latino district. And people are sort of questioning, why would a school board back this sort of agenda? So I think once you cross that line, it becomes a little hazy. But the second point, I think, Carolyn, is that in the state of California, local school districts are creatures of the state legislature. These are like water districts and other districts. Local districts don't have independent authority separate from the central state. So in the case of California, if the state wants to step in and provide local control funding, or the state wants to step in and protect kids with disabilities, the state has that legal authority. Now, Mr. Essayli's point, I think, Essayli's point is very important, which is when can the state legitimately intervene into the judgment of parents? And I think the case law is actually more murky than he's representing it to be. But again, that's another line we have to think about in civil society, is the state steps into families all the time to help families or to remove kids from abusive homes. So it's not unprecedented the state would bump into the rights of parents and families. But again, when the state does that, you have to be super careful, because otherwise you find yourself in this political tangle that we're enmeshed in.
Yeah, you mentioned the blurry lines. I mean, do you find that those lines blur continually, sort of reflecting larger things that are happening in the world?
Well, I think so. I mean, obviously around gender identity and gender issues, adolescents are starting to formulate their own decisions. When my kids were 16, 17, they were making their own decisions, whether my spouse and I were comfortable with that or not. So I don't think we should deny reality in terms of when young people are making decisions and the cultural forces that they're facing. On the other hand, I'm somewhat sympathetic to the first speaker where she's arguing no public official should push an agenda on a young person. The purpose of schools, going back to common schools in the 19th century in Massachusetts, were to encourage democratic conversation and tolerance and exchange of free ideas, not to push any particular cultural agenda.
Thank you. Assemblyman Jackson, where do you see these issues, or where would you like to see these issues headed in the coming year? Or what's next on your agenda, I should say?
Well, my agenda is top secret, so I can't share with you what my agenda,
Tell me.
my agenda is. Oh, just you, huh? No one else, okay. But, you know, I'm trying to be responsible for my words. Because this is truly going to be a dangerous year. And if we are not careful, people will lose their lives. And I believe that what we need to do is first, everyone must agree that using children as political pawns is just not acceptable. It's disgusting. And there are people who are trained to deal with the gray area that is working with children and the appropriate balances and all those type of things. And I think the appropriate role between the state and the child, right? I think every democracy needs to have those conversations. There's no doubt about that. And we need to continue to revisit them every now and then as society changes and all those things. But make no mistake about it. The issues that are now facing LGBTQ young people originated politically as a political strategy. Name a newspaper and I can tell you an article that was done before last year. And to use that to win elections, to get on news stations and get likes, is something that I worry about when I think about my own humanity and the importance of protecting my own humanity so I am not othering other people, that I'm demonizing other people. We have to take those things into consideration as we're going through this conversation. So at the end of the day, this year is about killing any movement that is using children as political pawns. Creating a process where parents who are legitimately concerned based upon what they're hearing in the news and what they're hearing in other places, they're now concerned. And if I were a parent, I would be concerned too if I was hearing those things. And now they're going to their school board trying to make sure that the worst in their minds are not happening. That's being a responsible parent. And that's okay. But what's not okay is for people to use the legitimate concerns of parents, go into those school boards, and make it into political theater. It's not okay. And so now, instead of talking about childhood poverty, which is even more egregious than anything that's happening right now, what we're talking about, the level of children who are growing up in poverty, where's your bill about that? And so the idea is that we have got to get past this in a responsible way that uplifts the dignity and humanity of all people, who thinks the best of each other instead of the worst of each other, so that we can preserve what little democracy we have left.
Thank you. Let me just check how we're doing on time here. Okay, one more. I have a question for you,
Sure.
Assemblymember, and then we'll get to questions. Assemblymember Jackson mentioned, there's other issues that are out there in the world, and I was going to ask you, considering, declining enrollment and budget cuts that are coming up, and other issues, the learning loss, the federal COVID relief money expiring, all these other things that school boards have on their plate right now that are kind of urgent. Why should this issue be a priority?
Okay, so I think there's a misconception here that the Republican Party has created or whole cloth fabricated an issue that doesn't exist. That's fundamentally false. From our perspective, we are responding to the indoctrination efforts that are happening at the school levels. Now, the Democrat Party will gaslight us and say, you're making it up, it's not true. Go look at the curriculum. Go look at the critical race theory that they were trying to push and teach at the schools, and they would say, we don't teach critical race theory. But you go look at the curriculum, kids are being taught that they are part of an oppressive group if they belong to a particular race, and they're trying to divide kids based on color. I disagree with that. Same thing with the gender ideology. They're teaching kindergartners and really, really young kids that they can pick their gender and that there's all these options that are available to them. And this is not, I believe, appropriate curriculum for kids of that age. And so when we talk about who's using children for pawns, I think we have to look at the Democrat Party. They are teaching kids that they can pick their gender, they can keep it secret from their parents won't understand you, your parent is a hate group, your parent will throw you out on the streets, you'll be homeless if you tell your parents. This is coming from the left. It's not coming from the right. I think it is more dangerous, more reckless to do this to these kids. And if you want to talk about lives in danger, I would talk about trans kids. They're at higher risk for suicide. It's an epidemic. Why? Why is that? And what proven effective peer-reviewed studies are there to support them? And everything shows they do better with parents, not without parents. You're also talking about the harm that they potentially could face if they go under medical surgeries. You're talking about medications. You're talking about kids that could be permanently sterilized. So let's not talk about like the fact that kids experimenting with transgenderism is a harmless, innocent thing. This isn't like experimenting with sexuality. We're talking about people changing their gender. We're talking about people getting operations. We're talking about children taking hormone blockers, puberty blockers. So I do think lives are in danger. I think it's these children's lives. Why this is a big issue? Because it comes down to the fundamental role of government. What is the government's role in the people's lives? The left, the Democrat Party, seems to think that they know what's best for parents. They know what's best for students. They know what's best for the public. It's a very, I believe, arrogant viewpoint. I don't believe that. I believe that people decide how they want to live their lives, how they want to raise their children. The government has an appropriate role to step in, to protect people when there's harm, and we have that in place. We have mandated reporters. If there's a teacher or a parent or anyone out there that believes a child is actually in danger, they have a duty to report to the authorities, who will get involved. Why are there children on the streets? That is a great question. We should look into that. There should be a study. Are they running away? Are they being kicked out? And why is the social services failing them? There should be no reason that a child is on the streets. We have social services. We have foster care. We have housing. It is unacceptable to have children on the streets. So let's talk about the failures of government. So I think it's a very complex and nuanced issue, but it hits hard on the fundamental role of government in our lives. And I think that's why you get such a strong reaction from people like me or on the Republican or parents, because they do not believe the government has a legitimate role in telling them how to live their lives and raise their kids. That's not up for negotiation.
Thank you. So we have some questions here. I'm going to see if I can through them. So, what social safety nets should be put in place to protect children that don't have positive parent supports? Any of you want to, Member Jackson, you want to take that
Sure.
on?
I mean, you know, I don't come from these views from a political lens. I mean, I have my master's and my doctorate in social work. This is the stuff that we do. And there's no doubt about a few things. What creates a healthy child? That a child has a whole support network. At its core is the family. But there's other supports that involves the systems that a young person is in. It involves the community and the people within that community. And the more caring adults that you can put around a young person, the more successful that they will be. Now, if there is an adult that is not providing healthy interactions with that young person, that person, number one, that person needs some supports to hopefully stop the negative impacts to a child. Or, unfortunately, in some cases, you have to ensure that that child is not around that whoever that negative influence is. So when we talk about what a child needs, which is why I even had a bill last year to ensure that there was a full-time mental health professional on each school campus, because there has to be someone on that campus that a child can confide in order to be able to work through whatever they need to work through. And they're human, which means it's going to be messy. And you need people who specialize in messy to be able to sort through those things and take a child through their own journey and ensure that if mistakes are made, that mistakes are made in a safe environment that minimizes the harm and increases the positive outcomes as they become an adult.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's true. California has done better with providing more counselors in schools. We used to be near the bottom nationwide, and now we're somewhere in the middle. So we're not where we need to be, but we're getting there. Next question.
I just want to say I have that study here. According to the ACLU 2021 survey, there is only one social worker for every 6,000 kids. So I don't think the schools are well equipped to deal with these issues.
Right, we're not. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Okay, 2018 data.
Next question. This is to Assemblymember Essayli. Schools do not inform parents when students begin or end a romantic relationship or follow cultural or religious customs such as eating meat during Lent. Why should the school inform parents of social transitioning as long as applicable school rules are followed?
So I think the question comes down to official school records. So when school records are being changed or altered, I do think parents have a right to know that. I mean, I grew up in it. By the way, I agree that parents don't need to be notified when you're having a relationship at school or making these changes. That's totally different from here. We're talking about changing official records. And I remember I had to get a permission slip, I think, to watch a Disney movie back in the day. I mean, things have changed. So my point is that when the school is taking any official action and they are socially transitioning the child at school, meaning the teachers are now going to refer to them and acknowledge them by a new name or identity, I do think it's appropriate for parents to know that that change has been requested and is happening. By the way, my law would not have prevented those changes from happening. All it said is that the parents get notified. so that the student can still select the new name and gender and pronoun. It's just to bring the parents into the loop. And again, this was triggered because the Department of Education put out guidance telling schools to keep it secret from parents. That's what started all this. It's not like we made it up. And that's what parents said, and parents have sued the school district saying, I was kept in the dark on this. Why? And they said we were required to do so by the state. So I agree with the premise of the question, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Next question for Assemblymember Jackson. Research shows that over 80% of children who are gender nonconforming or experience gender dysphoria grow more comfortable with their sexed bodies and become gay adults. How do we protect our gay, gender-questioning youth from disassociating from their bodies and seeking gender medicalization?
Well, I think I referenced part of it in my last answer. First, as you think about the stages of a child's development, that has to be taken into consideration as you're looking at the type of conversations you're having, the type of responses you're giving to young people. But there's a certain time where, number one, you have got to understand that people are also experts in their own lives, and that also includes children to a certain extent. And you have to trust them when they say that they could be in danger. And that has to be a part of the context in which we engage these young people. Now, the more that a person, and again, this society was not created for LGBTQ people to thrive, which is why you have to create your own kind of community and your own type of world in a way to be able to create a healthy and thriving community so that LGBTQ people can thrive themselves. And when you're able to create that atmosphere, then you're actually doing more good than any possible harm. Even if you even get into, sex changes and those type of things, you know what percentage that really is? It's not even a percentage, right? And so we're talking as if this is happening every day on every school, right? The likelihood that someone on a child on a school campus, this would even affect them or even apply to them is minuscule. And so instead, let's create a process in which if someone is identified, that there's a process that you go through that, number one, allows the child to know that they are safe at school, and that conversations and support systems that they are able to be surrounded with honors their full humanity, honors their experiences and the questions they're trying to get answers to, but also make sure that protects them from any danger that may come from anywhere. And unfortunately, and again, we talk about mansplaining a lot sometimes, right? Too many people are gay-splaining, right? Trying to tell me what my experience was as a young person or members of the LGBTQ community, right? Trying to ignore the fact that for a huge percentage of the LGBTQ community, that danger came from the home. It's sad to say. Nobody wants it. But to not acknowledge that and to not create a process that actually ensures that that harm isn't being created, it's just wrong, right? That's a moral question.
Carolyn, I just echo one thing Mr. Jackson just said, which is process at the school level. I mean, in special education, we don't put the onus on the teacher to label the kid, to call the parent one-on-one. No, we create a more participatory process of professionals and a support network for the child. So I think the local process issue is super important.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Let me just check the time. Well, I just wanted to ask, one thing I really wanted to do was kind of encourage the public to get involved in this issue. And so I wanted to ask all three of you, we only have like 3 minutes left, so keep your answers super short.
Don't ask the question then, it ain't gonna happen.
All right. What's the best way for people to get involved in this issue? It's obviously an issue that people care a lot about, and it's on people's minds, and it triggers a lot of reactions with people. I mean, how can parents be heard? How can the public and voters and families get involved in this issue? What's the best way? Bruce.
Go to school board meetings and have authentic conversations with parents. Don't just respond to the Mothers for Freedom website or an organization from Florida or Boston. Actually have authentic local conversations and caring conversations locally.
I would say get involved in elections because it matters who is in power to make these decisions. And I would say vote for people, don't vote for a political party. And I think that's where we've gotten a lot of trouble, is handing over too much power to one party in this state, and there's no moderation. There is no coming to the middle. It is one way or the highway, and I think that leads to extreme viewpoints.
Thank you. Jackson.
I think the first thing that has to be done is to making sure that we get better connected to our own humanity so that we can see the humanity in other people. And then to be able to think of the best of each other instead of the worst. And then when you have your own mind right, engage in the school and other parents to find out how can we make all of our children safe. And understand there's diversity in needs, and that there's enough that we can create resources that will help meet the individual needs of each child and each family. I have to say it over and over again. We are not being our best selves anymore. And we have got to work hard to be our best selves. Because if we can't be our best selves, there's no way the next generation will know how to be their best selves. Which means that we're going to continue this multiple generations, one after another. Our humanity has been weakened over multiple generations. We thought we were making progress, but we're headed in the wrong direction. So it has nothing to do with, voting and all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about humanity first.
All right, thank you. Kristen, I hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Professor Fuller, Assemblyman Essayli, Assemblyman Jackson, Carolyn, for all the questions. Thank you for you in the audience coming, and for those of you who are on Zoom. This is a very passionate subject for many people, and I really appreciate the dialogue that we are able to have here today. So appreciate you all showing up for this conversation. As I mentioned earlier, we are here at CalMatters. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom. We appreciate your support today, and you'll see on the screens here, we have QR codes so that if you aren't getting our news, that you can easily sign up for our daily newsletter. And if you are so inclined to support us, we would definitely appreciate that. We provide news to more than 280 news organizations across the state. We do that for free because we believe that it is important for people to get good information to make informed decisions. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.